Okay. Hello. Climate change and health, right?
Human health and climate change.
Human health and climate change. Welcome, I'm Cheryl from Color Brighton Green, and Alan will introduce our panelists. Thank you to all the people on Zoom and all the people in the audience. I'm going to be by the computer, so if you're on Zoom and you can't hear, let me know in the chat, and I'll ask our panelists to speak more loudly. Okay? Thank you.
Okay, am I mic'd? Yeah, something.
Yeah.
Well, good evening, everybody. We thank you, hardy folks, for coming. We want to welcome, on behalf of Color Brighton Green, everyone to our panel discussion titled Human Health and Climate Change. Now, I want to start off by pointing out that our title really isn't quite complete. We are talking about human health and we are talking about climate change, but we still also need to be talking about the human health hazards caused by pollutants created during fossil fuel combustion. Now, the two are interrelated. The solution to both is stop burning fossil fuels. But the distinction is still important to our discussion. I'm going to ask you to think about that as we listen to our panel. We're very lucky today to have a panel of 4 physicians representing respectively the disciplines of psychiatry, pediatrics, pulmonology, and emergency medicine. Each has specific expertise in the consequences of climate change on the diseases they treat. And in fact, going over their bios, I realized that I'm by far the least qualified person of the bunch. So for that reason, I'm going to keep my comments brief. Well, I do want to point out several themes that are going to emerge. First, the most significant physical harm from climate change and fossil fuel combustion is in respiratory health. Nevertheless, climate change and fossil fuel co-pollutants affect all bodily systems, and that includes the psychological impact of global climate change. Its consequences can be severe and are definitely far-reaching to the point where they are actually changing the fabric of society. Climate change has been called an injustice multiplier because the effects are borne most by those who did the least to cause it and who have the fewest resources to cope with it. And last but most important, there is reason to hope. There's much we can do, and much that's already being done. I'll close with some concrete examples about how you can make a difference. Now, one last point before we start. We want to answer any questions you have, but we ask you to hold back until all the panelists are done. We want to make sure they have all the time to say what needs to be said. And that's my speech. So let's get going. Our first panelist, Dr. Janet Lewis, is a psychiatrist in private practice, assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at U of R, a founding member of the Climate Psychiatry Alliance, and co-chair of the Climate Committee of the Group for the Advancement of Psychiatry, which is a big team. She speaks and teaches widely about the mental health effects of climate change, including in training of climate-aware therapists. Dr. Lewis?
Hi, thank you. Well, it's so good to be here as part of this. As was mentioned, I'm a psychiatrist, and so I deal both with the biological aspects of mental illnesses and also with psychological health. And climate change is challenging psychologically. It's not easy to come to terms with. We all have ambivalence coming to terms with climate change. And there's also a defense mechanism we all tend to employ called disavowal, where we can know and not know something at the same time. And that's the situation that we're all in various stages of emerging from with climate change. The mind doesn't come to terms with difficult things all at once. And so we're all going in and out of various degrees of disavowal. We know that climate change is there intellectually, but it has not yet completely penetrated emotionally and certainly in terms of our behavior. What healthy adaptation to climate change is psychologically is turning toward climate change in a way that's engaged, in a way that can allow for positive feelings in terms of well-being, and in a way that allows for mental space to be able to have goals and pathways to goals and adjust those as we there's a whole range of emotional reactions that are getting described in reaction to climate change, including grief and anxiety and hopelessness, but also some positive feelings, like feelings involved with solidarity and working with other people. Different generations tend to be experiencing different kinds of grief in relation to climate change. But the reactions of young people are especially concerning for all of us. For instance, there was a study done in 2021 of 10,000 young people ages 16 to 25. And it was an international study. But what was found with people in the US, for example, was the majority of the young people were either very worried or extremely worried about climate change. And looking at those in the US, 70% were endorsing that the future is frightening. 48% humanity is doomed. 44% the things I value most will be destroyed. So young people are particularly experiencing difficult reactions to climate change, feelings of betrayal. So it's important that all of us older people are stepping up. There are also very particular psychiatric effects of climate change directly. Heat is associated with increased risk of suicide, increased risk of violence, and there's trauma with increasing disasters. With disasters, there are varying amounts of PTSD in different studies, but it's often about 30%. 30% of people in a disaster experiencing PTSD, and also increased risk of depression, increased risk of anxiety, increased risk of domestic violence, and also with any trauma, we're also concerned about the next generation, because when people are traumatized, that affects the next generation too, even when parents are doing their best. And then air pollution was mentioned. Air pollution affects the brain. It increases cognitive impairment, risks of dementia. So there are a lot of ways in which climate change affects mental health, both directly and indirectly. And we have ways of containing, of bearing what can be so difficult to bear, so that we can then think and have space to make choices and to be engaged. We can do it through relationships. We can do it through leaning on spiritual beliefs. We can do it through identifying with narratives, like the Hebrews' time in the desert, where there can be suffering and tragedies, but we're part of a story that's about a big transition. And it can be dealt with agentically, being engaged with things. So that's about the end of my time. I'll turn it over here.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Our second panelist, Dr. Sandra, General Pediatrician, Associate Professor of Pediatrics, and of the Center for Community Health and Prevention, BAR. She is Director of the Finger Lakes Children's Environmental Health Center and co-chair of the Environmental Health, Climate Change, and Sustainability Special Interest Group for the Academic Pediatric Association. She is fellowship trained in pediatric health services research, integrative medicine, and has completed training as a Dean's Teaching Fellow and New York State Environmental Health Scholar. Her expertise on children's environmental health and climate change draws upon greater than 20 years of working directly as a primary care pediatrician and community-based participatory researcher with urban children, many of whom will have experienced health disparities. She teaches residents and medical students about environmental health and climate change. Dr. Jee.
Thank you so much, Alan. It's so embarrassing when someone reads your bio, because I think my kids would think, yeah, my mom doesn't really do anything. She just makes food. So thank you. And it's nice to have all of you here, because I know it's really hard to go out in winter nights. So thank you for coming. I think Alan asked us to be brief and he's coordinating what we're saying. So I had 3 different things I wanted to share with you so that we're not redundant. One is just thinking and building on what Janet said about trauma and the intergenerational effects of trauma. I'm a general pediatrician at Strong. I take care of a part of the practice that has almost 14,000 children, which is the largest pediatric practice in Rochester. We care for many of the kids in the city. Some of them are very medically complex and fragile. And we see a lot of trauma there. And I was going to start by sharing an example. When I teach this to medical students, I have this, we're not showing slides, but I have this intersecting like Venn diagram of structural racism, pediatrics, and trauma. And there's that underlying a lot of the patients that I see, and it's very socially complex. So I was, as a teaching example, I use a typical patient that I see would be like a preemie. Now with medical technology, we're seeing these babies that are 24 weeks old. They're very medically complex and they have multiple subspecialties they need to see when they leave care of the hospital, and they're usually in the hospital for months. So I saw a baby, an ex-24-week preemie who needed subspecialty care from GI, pulmonology, developmental disabilities, ophthalmology. They just require so much care. And then they come see me as a general pediatrician, and this mom is telling me she lives in a really like mold infested house with very limited resources. She had experienced the death of a close friend. Then she had another child. She experienced another fetal death in utero. So we have all this kind of trauma that patients are experiencing, and they live in the city with horrible living conditions, terrible air quality, often very limited air conditioning in the summertime. And then they have these children with many health problems, asthma, long-term respiratory problems. So I mean, I think we can talk about some of those things, but it's like when I think about climate change, it really affects patients who have very limited resources. But those patients really can like barely get their day-to-day needs met. And so when I think about like what our responsibility is as people who have a voice and agency and money and a car and all these things, I feel like we should do something. The second point, so that was like the first point I wanted to make, like the people who are most affected by climate change really have so many other issues. They can't even deal with the problems that they have that are causing their health problems to be worse. The second is I work very closely with Champion Academy, which is a youth development program. It's an amazing program with city kids, and I try to teach them about environmental health. So when I ask them about like, what do you think about climate change? They really, like some of them have heard about it through earth science class, but they really are not worried about it in the same way maybe suburban kids have this eco-anxiety, because it's like they're just, honestly, when I ask them about their environment, they're just worried about, are they going to get shot outside? Their parents don't let them play in the neighborhoods where they live. So I think about that too, because, you know, I have 3 teenage boys and they live a very comfortable life and they can go outside and play in Brighton, and just like 5 miles down the road, it's pretty terrible. So I just think about that in terms of like disparities and the health problems that these kids have. I talked to them about eating healthy, and I said, what kind of vegetables do you eat? And they said, is lettuce a vegetable? Like I'm not even kidding, like they really don't even know what most vegetables are. So those are the kinds of things that I'm trying to educate some city youth about. The third thing I want to talk about, because I know we have only 5 or 6 minutes. Oh, okay, it's something totally different that I've been working on this year in collaboration with some of my colleagues at different institutions. And I didn't know anything about this, but it's about this idea of fossil fuel divestment. And I read so much about it, and I can't say I'm really an expert, and it's pretty confusing, honestly. But the idea is that as a society, we need to kind of make a purposeful choice away from fossil fuels. The healthcare industry is horrible for polluting the environment. So if you look at the impact of healthcare systems, it's something like, the estimates vary, but it's like 10 to 15% of greenhouse gas emissions are related directly to the healthcare impacts of, like the NICU never closes. NICU never closes. They're always running. Like the lights are always on, and so that is contributing to this problem of climate change. So as an institution, a lot of the big institutions like the American Medical Association, the British Medical Association, the Australian Medical Association, they've all made a concerted effort to divest from fossil fuels. So I've written a paper with my colleagues at the Pediatric Association. I think the psychiatric pediatrics is horrible because they think like, oh, we're so concerned about kids, but they won't make an official statement about fossil fuel divestment. So I've reached out to the American Pediatrics president, who used to be a practicing pediatrician here, who actually, it's not that she doesn't care about climate change, but it's really complicated. But as a person, I think we have to think more about where we invest our money, because this is just one other thing I just want to add, which was shocking to me. Even the term carbon footprint was created by a marketing company that was hired by British Petroleum, so that it made people feel responsible for your own carbon footprint. But really, it's big corporate badness that causes like the worst problem. So that was shocking to me, because I'm always telling medical students, oh, okay, well, let's walk more, let's try to eat more vegetables. But that's like a drop in the bucket when you think of what these big companies are doing. Okay, that's all I have to say.
Well, that was certainly heartfelt. Let me interrupt by saying that this is meant to be a panel discussion, and panel discussions by their nature involve a lot of give and take. So we are going to get to questions, but we have to have some questions to ask when we're done. And that's the whole point of all these cards sitting on these chairs. If you think of something that you want to ask while people are talking, please write the question on a 3x5 card and then wave it up in front of you, and one of us will come up and pick it up, and they'll deliver them all where they can be asked. There are a whole bunch of pens over there in that University of Rochester Croft, if anyone needs something to write with.
And if you're on Zoom, just put your question in the chat.
Correct. Okay, so moving on to our third panelist, who I think is probably being excessively modest in his bio, because it's the shortest one here. Our third panelist, Dr. Daniel Croft, is an assistant professor at the Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine Division at the University of Rochester Medical Center. He specializes in treating patients with inhalational injuries, and his research focuses on the respiratory health effects of air pollution. Dr. Croft.
Thank you, and great to see everyone tonight. I thought that was a very heartfelt discussion about to give you a little insight of some of the guilt that we feel as clinicians sometimes, where we work in a big medical complex, and in a way we want to treat, we want to heal, but in a way we're contributing to the climate crisis. So with that guilt, we've turned it into trying to turn it into action and actually help the next generation, including our children and all of you. But I wanted to focus on the respiratory health effects of air pollution. And unfortunately, this is pervasive. All around the world, people are suffering as we speak with these respiratory health effects. If we think about the most common respiratory conditions, asthma, COPD, air pollution can not only cause these conditions, but it can also exacerbate these conditions. So asthma, clear example, if you know anyone with asthma, they are prone to exacerbations, if they have a bad weather day, if there's high pollen counts, if there's, a dramatic change in the temperature. And what we've seen is with climate change, we have a warming of the earth that has extended the allergy seasons almost up to a month in some cases, where the allergy season just seems like it never lets up. And then, I mean, you just look at our last winter here, we had green grass, in December and into January. And those things can really cause, wreak havoc for our patients with asthma. So certainly a very sensitive population. COPD, typically an older population, they can suffer from exacerbations as well, and unfortunately can frequently lead to hospitalizations due to other comorbidities from them. Something emerging is the link between air pollution and lung cancer. So this has been known that air pollution is associated with lung cancer. But we've noticed that with lung cancer, we say, well, why are these people, why are some of our patients that are non-smokers getting lung cancer? And for women, that can be up to 50% of women that are not smokers get lung cancer. Are there environmental factors that are leading to that? And the answer is likely yes. We don't know the exact number of what's attributed, what degree the air pollution causes that, but it's something that we need to look at because we can't have we're trying to deal with these chronic conditions that in theory are not fatal, asthma, COPD, but then we have otherwise seemingly healthy people getting lung cancer. It's terrible. So these are some of the focus areas in the respiratory arena. Now, something that's front and center for us is the next thing I wanted to talk about is respiratory infection. So we are surviving a pandemic, endemic virus, COVID-19, influenza. We have seasonal viruses that are causing trouble. This is an area that I have NIH funding to study is what's the link between air pollution and respiratory infection, and specifically our immune response to it. Because what we've seen is that air pollution appears to decrease our immune response to respiratory infection. So we're all trying to do our best. We're trying to walk. We're trying to improve our cardio, right, to have a better outcome with COVID in addition to becoming vaccinated. But, is there something in our air that's sabotaging that effort to be healthy, to get good sleep, to be healthy? And that's a concern, is that that there could be something just in our environment that's worsening it. And it does it a few different ways. There's a direct way that air pollution affects respiratory infection. It affects our immune response, the cells in our lungs, the immune signaling when the lungs are in trouble, when you have an infection and call for help from other cells. That phone line is cut by air pollution, and it just is really, really a concerning combination of health effects. But the other way is through a concept called One Health. And so when we think about our Earth, we're humans, but we share the Earth with animals and plants. And as we destroy habitats, ecosystems, we and animals are forced more closely together. And so it's no surprise to anyone that is focused on One Health or is aware of that we're getting more pandemic respiratory viruses as we and animals coexist, cohabitate more closely. So something to think about, and another reason to support measures to improve our stewardship of the Earth. And the final thing is trying to think, what are we going to do about it? So sure, we can wear masks on very high pollution days. If it's someone with asthma, they need to leave the house. It'd be reasonable to wear a mask. Now I'm looking at you all, and we're sitting in Rochester, New York. We have some of the best air pollution, the best air quality in almost the whole country. So we have excellent air quality. There are spikes though. We are not, when we see fires in Vancouver and Oregon and California, that smoke and those particles waft over, and we do have temporary increases in our own air pollution. So we do need to be mindful, but we need to also be thankful that we're in a privileged area here with very nice and with very good air quality. So I don't want to scare you with that, but some of the things we think about with respiratory disease is these asthma action days. If you've heard that, well, you say, well, maybe we shouldn't exercise as much on a bad ozone day or that. That's fair enough, because the amount of air you take in is about 10 times, if you breathe about 10 liters, and we're all sitting here, you breathe about 100 liters. when you're exercising. So you really ramp up the amount of air that's streaming through your lungs. So just something, these are considerations to think about, and to close with this. The air quality index is something that we look at. So airnow.gov, the EPA has an air quality measure for that. So you can pay attention to that to try to see if we're in an unhealthy air pollution day. So I'll close with a mantra that I would like to develop or continue to espouse, is to burn less and breathe better.
Thank you, Dan. I'm going to finish with Dr. Valerie Lou. She's an emergency medicine physician and faculty at the University of Rochester Medical Center. Completed her medical degree at UC San Diego and her residency, Masters in Public Health and International EM Fellowship at UMC. She completed a diploma of mountain medicine in 2019 with the Wilderness Medical Society. She's a former Denali Park Ranger. If you've never been there, God, it's gorgeous. She has been a National Park Trail crew leader and mother of 3. She has a special interest in climate change and human health, and is committed to helping the healthcare sector develop climate resilience and environmental responsibility. Dr. Lou.
Thank you for that introduction. And thank you guys for helping Rochester become my adopted home. I'm actually originally from Los Angeles, and I moved here about a decade ago to do my medical training and work at Strong Hospital. And I have to say, I think of myself kind of as a climate refugee. So not an uncommon thing now. You might have neighbors that have moved to Brighton because, I think about from LA, it's green here in the summer. It's not on fire. There's plenty of clean air, lots of great water in the Great Lakes and Finger Lakes, wonderful people, and like almost no traffic to speak of. I've really become lucky because when it's just a little bit tight on Monroe or Elmwood Avenue right now, I start getting frustrated, and I just have to think about the 5 freeway and realize I'm in a really good place. So thank you all for being my neighbors. So my main role in healthcare, well, I have 2 roles. I work as an educator, oftentimes with Sandy, teaching medical students and residents. And I also work in the emergency as a clinician, which I've been doing for about the last 10 years. Who here has had the misfortune of ending up in one of the emergency departments recently in the last year? Yeah. So I'm sorry. If you've been there, it's a bit of a disaster zone, and it's more of a disaster zone lately for a variety of reasons. Big part of it is COVID-19, part of it is staffing, part of it is actually just due to, I think, the pervasive effects of climate change. So the things that I think of that create the condition that we're in is it's so multifactorial. So we're having increased incidence of disease like COPD, asthma, and increased oral allergens. We're having these increased extreme heat days. So summer, a day like today, it's like you welcome the heat, but think back to those really, really hot summer days, and we're having more patients come in with heat stroke, heat exhaustion from those extreme heat days. A big change that I've seen just in the short 10 years I've been here is the incidence of Lyme disease. So in 2010, for those of you who lived here for more than 10 years, the incidence of Lyme disease in Monroe County was like less than 1 case a year. And when I work here in the summer, I get several cases a week, and that's due to just the creep of deer ticks moving northward because of Lyme. And then I'm not the only climate refugee. When Hurricane Maria struck, several thousand, I think around 8,000 people who were displaced from Puerto Rico because of Hurricane Maria came to Rochester where they had family and friends to try to start a new life. And that put a strain on already strained resources. So it kind of created this perfect storm of difficulty accessing healthcare. And I think that is something that I try to make clear to bring everyone together on this issue is that, climate change is something that's affecting the health of people in America, everyone in America, and it's affecting it right now. Because I think it's still a pervasive perception that healthcare is like a them problem or an over there problem. Like if you're living on the coast and you're drowning by rising oceans, but no, it's right here, right now, everyone's being affected. So, that's a little bit doom and gloom. And I always try to, if you're presenting a problem, you have to at least provide the glimmers of a solution. So that makes me think of what my colleague here talked about is the whole One Health approach. So that's a concept that came out in the 70s, that human, animal, and environmental health are all intertwined. And the new term for that is planetary health. So the Lancet, which is this British medical journal, came out with a special journal called Planetary Health. And it's an interesting thing to think about because it's not a one-way sort of relationship. It's not just that the health of the environment affects human health. We, by what we do, can affect environmental health as well, and we can have a win-win solution. So that's what I'd like to have people focus on is how can we do things that improve the health of the environment, the health of people, and also, sometimes there's financial benefits too. And that leads me to some of the work that I do with the Climate Solutions Accelerator. So for those of you guys who have heard of it, it's part of what has initiated this movement of Color Your Community Green, including Color Brighton Green, and today is the launch of Color Rochester Green. So rah, fantastic. What the Climate Solutions Accelerator is doing is trying to leverage these existing organizations and movements happening in our region to make positive changes on the climate front. So I've had the privilege to work with them and have an idea of what's happening regionally here. So like I said, Rochester, the Genesee Finger Lakes region has a lot of strengths. So we have water, we have clean air. We also have a really diverse economy. It's not just what you see in the suburbs with people working for the U of R, but there's an immense amount of agriculture that happens just a little bit ways away. So there's a lot of resources for us to work with here. But there's also a lot of weaknesses, things like really old housing stock. A lot of the homes, especially in the city, were built in the 1940s or even earlier, not well insulated, really prone to mold. No central air conditioning because who needed it back then, and that affects people's homes. And the other thing I think about is, how I can use my role as a physician to make change. So everyone has a sphere of influence, and I think what I do as a physician is try to make different sides of the table come together. So you say the word, who here is trying to have a conversation with someone about, you just say the word climate, and they're like, climate change doesn't exist. Yeah, so I think a better way to think about it is like, we know that it does exist. We talk to people about what matters to them about climate change. And something that matters to everyone is their health, right? Everyone wants the opportunity to live a healthy and happy life. So I think as a physician, I can be a nonpartisan helper and communicator in that standpoint. So I think the healthcare industry is still, despite some struggles, one of the most trusted professions. So I like to teach our medical students, our residents, to leverage their position as physicians to not just help with individual health, but to act as advocates for their patients, and do more in the community. There is a lot of precedent for that. When we think about 50 years ago, if we went to a restaurant, there was a smoking section, and it was really common to smoke cigarettes everywhere. A big reason why that's not allowed anymore is because physicians lobbied against it and made big tobacco back down from a lot of what they were doing with advertising and smoking being allowed in public spaces. Same thing for, if you go back to the Cold War, physicians against nuclear war. I can't think of a bigger existential threat than climate change right now. nuclear war is kind of competing with that. The physicians also led the charge in speaking against that. So I hope to channel some of my predecessors in being the voice to help physicians talk to the public and make change in that. So, thank you guys.
All right.
Well, I think that was pretty fascinating. Great panel, guys. Let's go give one. So I have just a little wrap up here because I want to approach this in a slightly different way. The medical approach is really, really important. But you know something, I didn't really want to find out to talk here. God knows why, because I'm pretty heavily involved in it now, as you all know, if you know me. So let me pivot to a hopeful political message. The last few years have seen enough technical progress to make fighting climate change not just feasible, cost effective. And even more important, political will is tilting the direction of action. So Biden's Inflation Reduction Act is actually a huge climate bill with benefits anyone can use to lower their carbon footprint. The Climate Act commits New York to net zero by 2050. So that's a local law, a state law. And this year, the DEC released a detailed plan on how to get there. That's the Climate Act. I'm sure most of you know that. Monroe County has a climate action plan, and so does the town of Brighton. But of course, climate action isn't a sure thing. There's well-funded fossil fuel interests opposing us. And even if federal legislation is on hold for a while, advocacy is really important. There's a whole slew of bills in the state that are really good bills, and they just need a little help from us to push over the finish line. So this is a chance for everybody to advocate. You can advocate at the state level, you can advocate at the county level, even at the municipal level. We have a selected list of climate and climate justice organizations right here. Tracy's got them, and you can pick them up if you want to get involved more. I see that most of you are already plugged in, but for those of you who aren't, we have that list right there. You can start with Color Brighton Green. We're here, we're sponsoring this talk. If you live in Brighton, it's a great way to go, but there are a lot of other Color You Community Green organizations if you want to go local. I did want to describe my experience at the state last week. I was at the Climate Act hearing in Albany, and the popular talking point from the skeptics was, well, New York is small. We only make up 3% of the world's greenhouse gases. What if nobody else goes along? Why bother? Why bother? And I wanted to grab the mic and shout. They're watching us all over the world. If we lead, they will follow. But there's a second answer, and it's about the distinction between climate change illness and co-pollutant illness, which I mentioned earlier. You know, global warming is like a freight train. It's going to be very slow to turn around, and that means the health problems it causes directly, like heat stress, like the diseases that we come into contact with, like the Lyme disease crawling up from the south, those zoonotic illnesses, as we call them, they're going to be with us for a long time, even if we make it to net zero. But co-pollutants of fossil fuel combustion, the particulates, nitrogen oxides, and stuff like that, that stuff is transient, very local. If a single home switches from gas heat to electric heat, asthma levels in that home will drop. If a single city switches to electric and stops burning fossil fuels, asthmatics living there stop going to the emergency room, or at least decrease their visits very, very quickly. Work lost due to illness goes down relatively quickly. In a couple of years, the incidence of heart disease drops and it becomes obvious. That's not something you mentioned yet because you're a pulmonologist, but we see it in internal medicine. In a decade or two, fewer people are getting lung cancer and emphysema. If we can do it statewide, we will accrue a carefully calculated $170 billion climate savings by 2050. And to my initial point, we will get that benefit even if the rest of the world does nothing, because it's a local effect. So get out there, well, not complete local, we still have that Vancouver fire stuff, right? So get out there and do something. Use Inflation Reduction Act money to subsidize a heat pump or an electric vehicle. Get involved with the climate organization. Add your voice to the groundswell of support for climate action. There has never been a better time to get involved. And with that, I'm going to open up to questions.
Got two online.
Okay.
Okay, my first online question. Please comment on the emerging awareness of the health effects of gas stoves.
Well, I just mentioned it. Who wants to take that one? Yeah.
All right, well, great question. Certainly been in the news. My colleagues and I talked about this just these past days to reflect some of my mentors. University of Rochester has been a longtime leader in studying air pollution and studying the health effects of air pollution. My mentors, Dr. Utel, Dr. Frampton, Bill Hopke, Dave Rich, were remarking that they've done these studies in the 80s, the 90s. These data have been available for years. The study of nitrogen dioxide and some of the health effects. Now, the recent study, so there was a recent study published about what the percentage of asthma attributable to the gas stoves, and I think they estimated somewhere around 15%. Now, all over the world, about 13% of asthma is attributed to general air pollution. So it seems to be a reasonable estimate. All these studies are really estimates. You have to take the whole body of work there. So the truth, the truth lies somewhere in that, that 10% range, potentially. I think, but the numbers, I think what we saw in the press and what we were remarking on is that the numbers that our colleagues in the media can sometimes grab onto numbers and really run with those. And I think the more important thing is the concept, right? And as I mentioned, my overall approach is to burn less and in hopes of breathing better. And so when you look at your house, you try not to burn things in your house. So if you're using a gas stove, it's important to eat, right? So you got to eat. If you have a gas stove, use it. Try to ventilate that gas stove, right? Because there is nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter pollution that's coming off of the gas stove, methane, even. So you do want to ventilate that. Use your vent hood. Okay, well, my vent hood doesn't vent outside. Someone would say, well, you open up, the neighboring window, or you put on the bathroom fan in the, in the nearby room. You try to do whatever you can to keep the air moving in your home. That's a key to managing indoor air pollution. But indoor air pollution is a big deal. But it's pollution. Smoking a cigarette's pollution. Seeing a smokestack's pollution. Driving, a internal combustion engine. It all contributes to pollution. So there's not necessarily something unique about the gas stove that's going to, unfortunately, I think a little bit of the sensationalism. People think I'm going to die if I use a gas stove. I think that may, it's good to raise awareness about indoor air quality, but it's just all pollution. We need to reduce. We need to do what we can to reduce it. My goal, but no, we're not expecting anyone to drop dead from that. I also want to say the Inflation Reduction Act does have rebates available for transitioning from gas stoves to electric stoves up to about $840, depending on your income. So something to look for. So just Google the act and how can it help me, and you'll find that it very well could. But I'll leave it there if someone wants to ask.
So, one more thing about natural gas is I think we have to remember that a lot of our grid is powered by natural gas. And this is where healthcare sector, the University of Rochester needs to look at its own house, because a lot of energy source for the water is through the cogen plant, which runs off natural gas. So, that's something that if you're affiliated with the UR, something to kind of push wherever you have influence on that. And, whatever small business you run or wherever you can, just realizing that everyone has their sphere of influence, and whether it be, in your own home and trying to find ways to get rid of your gas stove and use those tax credits, or what's the business that you're in. Those are all ways that you can use it.
And I would be remiss to say, nitrogen dioxide is a respiratory irritant. So if someone does have asthma or severe COPD, the ventilation is that much more important, and probably just trying to avoid having children just sitting right by a gas stove. Just be reasonable with your gas stove use would be my goal.
Okay, so we have questions for each of the panelists. I've given them, so I'm going to start here with Dr. Brooks.
Okay, a very good question here about the transgenerational transmission of trauma and what the causes of it are. It's multifactorial. One way that trauma gets transmitted has to do with attachment, and if a caregiver is distracted with their own trauma, they're not able to be as available. But there are other factors too. If a woman's pregnant and undergoing trauma, there are hormonal effects on the fetus. We know that there can be genetic effects. So it's multifactorial. So this is very important, though, that parents need support. Parents going through difficult times need support. We're dealing with environmental refugees, large traumatized populations. We'll probably see more. And we're going to need to be thinking about, how to support these families to help them not only now, but to help interrupt the transmission of trauma.
And moving on to Dr. Jee.
Thank you. I think there's a question about one-time use items in hospitals, cost benefits, and could it be controlled? And in pediatrics, in outpatient general pediatrics, which is what I do, we actually don't have that much waste that I can think about, but I give a lot of credit to Val, because Val actually started a green team within the emergency department. So made me start a green team within pediatrics. Actually, it's not in the whole department of pediatrics, because I asked them to do that, but only I really wanted to do it. So I'm doing it on the outpatient side. So one of the things that we have done is we made it the interdisciplinary committee of like the secretary, nurse, a nurse practitioner, 2 physicians, all getting together to think about what are things we can do about sustainability within our own practice. So one of the things we've done, because we don't use that many single-use items, is paper, because in pediatrics, we give a lot of vaccines. So for example, for a 1-year-old well child, they get 5 shots, sometimes 6, if they get the flu shot, and each of those shots has about 4 pieces of paper that we always gave them that were different multicolored pieces of paper. And we give so much paper to the patients, they literally never used it, but we were obligated by law or whatever to give them this paper. So one thing that our committee did is we made these a single black and white sheet of paper with QR codes with like measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox. And so they can scan it with their phone if they want. Most of the time, nobody wants any of that information, honestly, but it's just one piece of paper, and if you circle it, we say you're getting the measles, mumps, rubella, you're getting the chickenpox. So they're very happy, because on the front side, it has all the QR codes. On the back side, it has the schedule of what shots. So they know next time when I come for my 15-month shots, I'm getting these 2 shots. So they're prepared. It's really cut down on paper usage. We're trying to actually summarize that into a scholarly paper, but it's not really research. I mean, I'm just estimating, instead of giving them 20 pieces of paper that are multicolored, we're giving them 1 piece of paper. Usually they don't take it in and we can secretly recycle it, but they have all these silly rules, like you can't give paper to another patient, even though they didn't even really touch it, because they might have put a disease on it if they touched it. It's very silly with those kinds of things. But because of that, we've kind of, as a group, looked at where are ways that we can be more sustainable. But things that we can't, that maybe somebody needs to invent is like when you examine a patient and you look in their ear, those little plastic things. We use a different plastic thing. I use probably 20 or 30 of them a day, and then multiply that by the 40 providers in our office. It's like so many little pieces of plastic that just goes right in the garbage. So maybe somebody could make a lot of money by making something that you can reuse and, you know, autoclave and do that. But there are all these rules about infection control within the hospital that make it difficult. I think in the ED, Val can probably speak to, they've done some stuff with autoclave or other things that were, that the emergency department, actually, I'm sorry, it's like very wasteful. Surgery is very wasteful because you open one little bandage, then you have to throw everything else away. So we don't do that as much as where I work. Something else.
Yeah, I think that whole QR code thing is super clever. And it's interesting because I think medicine has a lot to learn from other industries. Because I feel like other sort of customer service front, because we are customer service, front-facing industries have found out ways to do this more cleverly. But something that one of my residents is working on is doing life cycle assessments on figuring out, so this is something from industry, a tool that they're using to see what is the lifetime cost of an item, down from mining the materials to using it, to cleaning it or sterilizing it, and then disposing of it. And you can do that for something that's a single-use item, or something that's a multi-use item. And sometimes the results are surprising. You know, like I think about this with single-use plastic bags versus canvas bags. Like canvas bag seems better, but if you only use it like 5 times before you lose it, then it's not really that helpful. But more and more trying to train physicians, nurses to be involved in this life cycle assessment process to better purchasing choices and equipment use decisions. So that's one way that the healthcare industry can help that whole bad emitting rap that we have. Because the 10 to 15% is one way of putting it. But if you look at healthcare industry as a whole, it would be the 5th highest emitting country on the planet, just the healthcare sector. So we got to look around the house for sure.
Could I say something about this too? Yeah, this is being looked at in various disciplines, and you know, here I am in psychiatry. You would think emissions aren't a big deal. I just need an office, Kleenex. But actually in every specialty, and if people reflect on their own industries, in every industry, there are some pretty sneaky sources of emissions. So in the UK, they have a national health system, so they've been able to analyze various factors in emissions. And in the mental health system there, they determined that in addition to building space, transportation, a big factor is pharmaceuticals. When you think about the manufacture of all these pills, I mean, some of which are done in factories that are powered by coal in other countries. And when you think about all the wastage, I mean, any of us could attest to this, all the pharmaceuticals that get wasted because people's medicines change or samples end up getting thrown out when they expire, or you know, that's an enormous source of emissions that can be worked on right there, just working at not wasting pharmaceuticals. And then another factor that doesn't get looked at enough, but we did a study, it was led by Josh Wurtzel, the study. He used to be a psychiatric resident at the University of Rochester. When COVID hit, the American Psychiatric Association annual meeting was virtual instead of in person. And so it was an opportunity to calculate what the differences were in emissions. Okay? And as many of you probably know here, air travel is an enormous source of emissions. Not going on one transatlantic trip saves more emissions, more than twice as much emissions as going vegan for a whole year. It's really enormous, air travel. And within medicine, every specialty has these conferences, right? Where people fly from all over the country and all over the world in order to be together for a handful couple of days. So this is something else really to be examined in every profession, you know, how to balance the benefits of being in person with all the travel that goes into all of our conferences.
So are you telling me that I shouldn't be going to the ACP convention in San Diego this year? Is that what I'm hearing?
Oh, you know.
Okay. Dr. Lou.
All right, I have a question in front of me that's a very astute question. How is the medical institution preparing for massive migration from climate refugees? So this might not be the most institutionally PC answer to give, but I'm not known for giving those answers. So I actually don't think the medical institution is adequately prepared. Because right now, the emergency department is already at and beyond capacity. So there's this concept in emergency medicine called surge capacity, where you leave a certain amount of resources in space in case there's like a mass casualty event, say like there's a bus crash and you have 50 critically ill patients, or say there's this has happened. There's like catastrophic flooding somewhere in Lake Ontario, and this community building has a bunch of people that need help. So you are supposed to leave resources in space in case that happens, and we don't have it right now. All of our surge capacity is currently being used and exceeded. So it's kind of frightening. But we are building a new medical tower at Strong Hospital. The enabling projects are already in place, so there's going to be more space, and various things are happening behind the scenes to make more personnel. But I think the thing not to forget is that there's this concept of climate mitigation and climate adaptation. So the things that we're doing with the hospital to increase capacity are mitigation, basically things that you do to prevent climate change from harming people, right? But sometimes those actions are not adaptive, meaning that they're going to worsen the climate change situation in the long term. So the best example I can give of that is for heat stroke, right? So saying, oh, all these people are dying from heat stroke. Nobody in Monroe County, has central air conditioning. Let's just install central air conditioning in everyone's homes and save lives. But in the long run, what that does is it creates a lot of pollution from energy use that's not efficient. So it's not really the best way. It's not a win-win situation. But there are things that you can do, like install a heat pump, which uses a lot less energy. It's electric. And you can also take advantage of the Inflation Reduction Act's credits to do that. And a lot of that money that's being spent is required by New York State to be reinvested in minority communities of color, places where people have lower socioeconomic status. So that's a win-win-win. So I think going forward, if the U of R wants to be legit in maintaining its nonprofit status and be a steward of the community, it needs to think about ways it can increase capacity in a way that's not harmful to the environment. So things like having LEED certified buildings, things like being energy efficient, and yeah, thinking about the community members that really need them most.
We take a few online questions.
Go ahead.
Okay. Do children today spend enough time in the outdoors and learn about our environment and biodiversity to have an appreciation of what is being threatened by the climate crisis?
I think that's an excellent question, and the answer, of course, is no, right? Because since COVID, everyone stayed inside. A lot of our patients have just become, kids are always addicted to their devices. It's horrible. Like from the time they're 8 or 9 months old, they're coming into the office, and that's their main form of babysitting life. So it's really important for kids to get outside. I think things are pretty bad now, and we have to educate the younger generation to be excited about the environment, and the way that they care is by getting outside, seeing nature, and feeling a sense of urgency to protect that. So,
Next question, please comment on Hope's Empower Plus program, which may help low-income families refit their heating systems.
Not familiar with it.
yeah, no comment.
I think there's some really good resources if you look, actually through like the Climate Solutions Accelerator website on how to be connected. There was, what was the program called? There's a program through the accelerator to put people in touch with those tax credits and resources.
Heat smart, right?
Heat Smart Monroe, that's it, to help with that. So, you know, sometimes like filling out paperwork and the whole process can be confusing, but there's lots of community partners that can put you in touch with the right contractors to do the job and how to get those tax credits.
Okay. And is the AMA taking a stand on health impacts of climate change and fossil fuels?
Yes. Yeah, the AMA, I think they said climate change is the biggest threat to human health in our lifetimes. Yeah, the AMA is totally made a position statement. Actually, almost every medical specialty has made some statements that saying what a big threat climate change is. How to enact things to ameliorate the problem is like still in process, but it's well recognized.
Okay, one more. Has the U of R considered district geothermal energy?
Karen?
One of our,
Okay, sure. Yeah, okay. This is Dr. Karen Berger.
Okay, come up there in the picture. Come on.
I just to briefly comment on that. So the university does have district heat. It's powered by the cogen facility that Val mentioned, which runs on natural gas. And I know they did have a study commissioned by NYSERDA or the New York Power Authority within the last year or two, looking at the feasibility of adding in geothermal as an energy source for that. So it is something they are actively looking at, even though I can't say that they.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to comment that the Heat Smart Monroe has now graduated to the Climate Hub. And so we now have in Rochester, through the Climate Solutions Accelerator, a Climate Hub through which you can get all your information about going electric. It's a great resource. I have a question here for Dr. Croft.
All right, I have a question. Does burning candles have respiratory effects? And this is something that Good Housekeeping actually just asked me and colleagues around the country. So there is an article there where I have some comments on it, but you know, I looked into this area. It's a really good question because, you know, you think about the gas stove, you think about the different things in your home. Now, candles seem small, right? So hold a candle up to the gas stove. You get one tiny little flame, you know, versus, you know, 12 different, you know, blue flames there. However, typically or traditionally, there was a 2013 study that didn't show any associations between candles and respiratory health effects. However, there's a more recent study that did show a small but non-significant signal there. What I would say to kind of succinctly talk about candles in your home is this again is a burning issue. And I don't want to sound completely anti-burning, but I am. So the less you can burn, the better. And so again, this is a ventilation issue. If you want to, you know, if you have your home lit up like a Gothic cathedral, there's going to be a lot of air pollution. You are going to have soot. You're going to have, you know, you're wiping soot off the windows, the PM. And ultrafine particle concentration will be high, but if you want one candle, you know, that smells nice and helps your mental health, you know, you have to balance these things. We don't want to create a sterile environment. You know, you can use these things, but just think about the ventilation. And I want to tell you this about candles. There are two. So one of us breathing in this room takes emits a certain amount of carbon dioxide. 2 candles that are lit on your table burn in emit the same amount of carbon dioxide that one human does. So when you're thinking about, do I have enough space to be burning these candles? Just think about humans, look at 2 candles, that's a human, and just count them up. And that'll give you the sense of how much ventilation needs to be used. But there are particles released, there's small amounts. But this is an active area of research, very insightful question. Something that I'm going to be watching this area of research develop, but just be reasonable, everyone, be reasonable.
I have a question. In Fairport, they have Fairport Electric. Why does Fairport have electric and every place else has gas? And I'm wondering, is there a difference in prevalence? No, you're saying no?
Everybody has gas. Airport Electric has a good rate.
Oh.
There is nothing about their own.
I mean, I have to admit, we have a gas stove and we're thinking of renovating our kitchen. And if I think I want to renovate my kitchen, I'm not excited to use an electric stove because I personally feel like I'm not a great cook to start with. And it's really hard to like monitor. So
Yeah.
We're
gonna.
Perfection of.
Yeah, I think, Val and I are going to make a shameless plug for induction. We don't own stock in this technology, but induction stoves, which you may have, is incredible. It's like magic. I mean, it's electromagnetic heat, instantly heating thing. It's amazing. It is a luxury. So I'm talking about privilege here. It is a luxury, but electric stoves are also good. Electric stove technology has come a long way. Okay, electric stoves can do the job. So you get in on that tax benefit now, right? When you're doing your renovations, save $800. But yes, you can do it. I will tell everyone you can do it on electric. You can have beautiful meals.
We have 2 questions from Tim McGowan here. I'm going to give him the microphone so he can address you.
So yeah, first question is to Dr. Lewis. In terms of psychiatry and mental health generally, so I'm curious about forecasts and models being used to imagine or to embed the risks of mental health coming from climate change moving forward. And kind of with that, what's the movement within psychiatry nationally to begin to gear up for what you would imagine to be increasing symptom presentation, let alone the scale of trauma from the multiple effects on not only climate change, but the other dimensions, polarization, pandemic, etc. Just curious about.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, thank you for that. I know Alan was saying pulmonary is the biggest risk of climate change. I think I would disagree. I think it's mental health.
I agree. I mean, if you can't breathe, you can't think. So go together, and one can.
But you're bringing up the forecasts, but what we're looking at going forward, with as was mentioned, there are residence times of these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. CO2 stays in the atmosphere for varying lengths of time, depending on conditions, but usually for decades. Methane stays in the atmosphere for 12 years. There are feedback loops that accelerate effects, like the loss of the albedo effect of ice, where more heat's getting absorbed by the dark ocean than by the white ice, and the melting of the permafrost, which is known to contain large amounts of methane. And so the projections going forward are really concerning. There was one graphic in one of the IPCC reports, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, where they were projecting how well we're going to be able to adapt in various realms to the effects of climate change. And when it came to mental health and violence, they really weren't sure how we were going to adapt. So yeah, this is concerning. And part of what we're looking at going forward is that we're going to be in a new kind of relationship with disaster. You know, we now think of disaster as sort of this outlier event. But if you've lived long enough, you know the reality is we're either within or between disasters. That's life, right? But that's going to have to permeate more the understanding culturally that we're either within or between disasters. And so that has implications for the structuring of society, people's individual roles. So what we can do, and what I think is so very important to do, is to work at aligning ourselves with the positive aspects of possible futures. And part of that is all these mitigation efforts, you know, to get to net zero with our emissions. But in terms of adaptation, when we look at, okay, what are going to be the positive aspects of futures that can work, even though there's no way of knowing exactly what all characteristics are going to be of how things are structured in the future. There are just too many variables. But a couple of the broad strokes are, for things to work, it's gonna have to be a much more pro-social kind of society, a pulling together. You know, if we're within or between disasters, it means that if you're within a disaster, it means you have to be focused on rebuilding your life and dealing with whatever trauma and grief. And then it's incumbent on the people who are between disasters to be helping the people who are within disasters, right? And then those roles are going to shift, right? And so understanding that when we're in a fortunate position, like we're probably going to be in Rochester most of the time, when we're in a fortunate position between disasters, we have extra responsibility, right, to be thinking about how to help. It's the people between disasters who are going to be the ones in the position to be working on large-scale adaptation and mitigation systems, you know, programs. So a positive aspect, actually, of a kind of future that can work is things becoming more pro-social. You know, I mean, during times that are very difficult, also some very beautiful things can go on. If you look at what happened in Buffalo with the blizzard, a lot of tragedies, but also a lot of beautiful stories about people banging on the house, you know, the door of the nearest house being taken in. And so the development of that kind of a closer, more supportive society is part of what we can aim for, and also the integration of in a healthy way of working with grief in a more healthy, ongoing way, rather than it being considered, you know, something that is just like on the outside and you experience it and you get through it, and, but understanding it more as part of how a society needs to function. So you know.
Really, really wonderful. Thank you. Just a brief things, just to tag on that we mentioned cultural piece and the cultural shift, and pro-social and health and planetary health. I just wonder about the role of strong EMA and specialties in terms of expanding, permeating the culture with both of those values. Now, I mean, clearly it's already the case from trends that are, I think, including this real concern for people of color. But looking at it increasingly larger scales seems to be increasingly important, especially from the health sector.
Yeah.
And so I just wonder about that in terms of a kind of a meme or something.
Yeah.
Visionary region.
Yeah. Let me say one more thing, because you also mentioned our multiple crises, right? And you know, this is getting talked about as sort of a meta crisis, a poly crisis, right? We're facing all of these different things all at once. So people will say, how can I focus on climate change when there are all these crises going on? Well, there's a sense in which, yeah, they can all be thought of as one crisis, right? This is what we're experiencing as our current ways of doing things are running up against their limitations. Right? And I mean, you're saying about we need a big view. I think so. When you understand how complex systems work, and we're all in this complex system here. I mean, the geosciences are enormously complex, but now they're completely intertwined with human technology and human systems, human culture, human psychology. The way complex systems work is, things can go non-linear and often do. Everything's very complexly interdependent, but there are some hopeful features in that. Okay, one is the butterfly effect, which most of you have probably heard of, based upon the idea that things are so complex that a butterfly flapping its wings in Africa can make the difference as to whether or not a hurricane hits South Carolina. Right? So you never know how important something you do might be. And another is the phenomenon of what's called emergence, where it's also called self-organization, where a complex system can get to new ways of operating that can work. And there's no way of knowing ahead of time exactly what all the features of that new way are going to be. But complex systems are capable of this. In biological systems, it's called evolution. But it happens in social systems and other kinds of complex systems too. So this is a hopeful feature of the situation we're in. The woman who shepherded the Paris Agreement, and the Paris Agreement was revolutionary, because at the time there was widespread hopelessness about there ever being any kind of international agreement. And the woman who did it, the diplomat, Christiana Figueres, she said that when she took the job some years before, she was hopeless about it. But she heard herself say to some reporter, "Not in my lifetime," and she caught herself and realized, this is unacceptable. I cannot accept this. And she devoted herself to creating the conditions in which emergence could happen. Going into the Paris Agreement, nobody knew exactly what the character of it was going to be, and still 196 nations managed to come to an agreement. It was really revolutionary. And she described believing in the power of collective action, the power of collective wisdom, and being willing to step onto that uncertainty. And one thing she said that really struck me is she said, we've been living in linear time, and we could be living in exponential time if we're willing to make the inward changes. And by that, she meant believing in collective action, collective wisdom, and just stepping onto uncertainty.
So, thank you. Yeah, really.
I wanted to ask Dan a question, actually, for myself, stepping into the role of the participants. You have done a lot of your work here in Rochester people, have you not?
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So as I just said, we have good air quality. So what am I doing here? Am I out of a job then if I want to study air pollution? Of course not. Even though we may get chided by someone that lives with particulate matter in the 100 range and we're down to 7, what we've come to understand is that the air pollution, even at the lower concentrations, changes in that air relative changes can have health effects. And so it's important, when you have increases in air pollution, there are risks of health effects from that, even in our nice setting here. So we need to manage that. But the studies we've done, New York State studies funded by NYSERDA, a group that was mentioned, they are a very generous organization and very focused on our, on the health of New York State. We've looked at the association between air pollution statewide and respiratory infection, heart attacks, even neurologic disease. And so there's a wide variety of different health effects as we've all discussed with air pollution, but we've had just an incredible opportunity here to look at that, and finding that even in low pollution settings like this, there are small health effects from them. So the more that we can reduce our own emissions and be a beacon of hope for, and be a good example for others to reduce theirs, then those upwind sources that are blowing onto us, right? So, when Toronto shuts down its coal-fired plant, that's great for us. When we shut down our coal-fired plant, that's great, of course, for us too. But the entire world, its air pollution matters to us here in Rochester. So the more we can do globally, it does have a good effect for us.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. We have to wrap up. I wanted to ask for a round of applause for our great panel. Now, if you want to get more involved, I mean, I realize looking at the crowd that most of you are already dropped the cool. But if you have not and you want to get involved in the climate fight at any level, there's a one-pager here of selected organizations that you should feel free to avail yourself of and get involved, because getting involved right now is really crucial. This is the inflection point. A lot of people are saying that. We're finally building up the political will, the realization, it's all there. So do it. And thank you very much for coming here and getting involved.
There's also a sheet, which I'll have Tracy put next to that one, it's on the table over there, about our next event, which is February 13th. It's called The Problem of Plastic. It's right here at 6:30, also on Zoom. We have 2 dignified national speakers coming to talk about plastic. So thank you all so much on Zoom and the participants. Thank you to our panel for coming tonight.
Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, was this